Good afternoon, class. Today we have 7.5 differentiation and integration of inverse functions. First part we do review of inverse trig functions. First one is sine x. You know the graph of sine x goes like this. That means sine x is not a one-to-one function because it fails the horizontal line test. For this to pass the horizontal line test, we have to restrict the domain from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So this part and that part will go. So this part is where sine x is 1-to-1. That's the domain from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. The range is from negative 1 to 1, just like before. So the inverse of this function, written this way, is the range of sine x. The range is the domain of sine x. This is how we write it, or arcSecx. And the graph of sine inverse looks like this and bends a little bit. Remember, if we draw these two graphs on the same plane, they happen to be reflections of each other across the line y is equal to x. The second one is the inverse of cosine x. This is the graph of cosine x. And just like sine x, it's not a one-to-one function because it will fail the horizontal line test. But if we have restriction on its domain from, let's say, 0 to pi, that part will pass the horizontal line test. So the domain, the restricted domain is from 0 to pi. The range is negative 1 to 1. Its inverse is cosine inverse of x, or and y is equal to arc cosine x. The domain for this should be the range of cosine x, should be the domain of cosine x. And the graph, negative 1, now we have 1, 0, negative 1, this. So if you look at these two graphs, if we have these two graphs on the same plane, you find that they are reflections of each other across the line y is equal to x. The third part of the inverse trig functions is tan x. Again, this is a review. This first part one is just a review. And the graphs of tan x looks like this. Go this way, they go to the other side too. And therefore, any horizontal line that you draw will intersect the graph infinitely. So you have to restrict the domain. Again, just like the others. To do this, there is that part off, there is that part off. This is the part of the graph that we'll use. This passes the horizontal line test and therefore it's a one-to-one function. It's inverse. Let's talk about the domain first of this function. So it's from negative pi over 2, not included, to pi over 2, not included. The range, as you can see, it goes all the way up, it goes all the way down. So the range is negative infinity to infinity. Its inverse is y is tan inverse of x, or y is arctan x. Do the graph of this. The domain for this one should be that, all your numbers. The range should be that, from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. The graph, I'll do the graph here, negative pi over 2. This is negative pi over 2. These two lines happens to be horizontal asymptotes for the inverse function. Just like vertical lines here, these two vertical lines are asymptotes for the graph of tan x. In the case of the inverse function, they turn out to be asymptotes. How does the graph look like? Doesn't touch those two horizontal lines.